Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continued help, that in all our works begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may glorify thy holy name, and finally, by thy mercy, attain everlasting life. Amen. Introduction of guests. I recognize the Minister of Energy and Resources.
Here. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you to this Assembly, I'm pleased to introduce some guests in your gallery, Mr. Speaker. We have Mark Schultz, Mark is the President and CEO of the Canadian Association of Energy Contractors, and he's joined by a couple members of his organization, David Odgers with Certified Well Servicing, and Alden Colshaw with Ensign Energy Services. Mr. Speaker, the oil and gas industry, and everybody's aware of this, are hugely important to the province of Saskatchewan. They're about 15% of the GDP for our province. Mark's group, the Association of Energy Contractors, is a trade association for Canadian energy service industry operating close to the wellhead from coast to coast. And their organization has been extremely helpful for my ministry, the Ministry of Energy and Resources, and also for myself in my office. Anytime we've called on them for advice or consultation, they've always been more than willing to do that, and it's been super helpful. I want to thank them for that, Mr. Speaker. They're here today. They're going to be hosting a reception for all members of the Assembly later this afternoon. We look forward to seeing them there. And Mr. Speaker, I would ask all members of the Assembly to please give them a warm welcome to the Legislative Assembly. Thank you.
Recognize a member from Regina University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you and to all members, I'd like to join with the Minister opposite in welcoming these guests to this Legislative Assembly. Welcome back. It's always a fantastic reception that you put on, and the work that you do for your own members through member services, through advocacy, through the close working relationship that you have with this province, as well as the important work that your members, innovators and entrepreneurs here in Saskatchewan do to help build the province, support their communities, both through the direct work that they do, as well as some of that secondary unseen work that they do, whether it's in supporting schools or charities or other wonderful organizations, does not go unseen by any member in this Assembly. Look forward to the reception, and I'd like to ask all members to join with me in adding our welcome to these guests to the Legislative Assembly.
Here.
Recognize the Minister of Parks, Culture and Sport.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to introduce to you and through you, seated in your West Gallery, very good friend to, I think, everyone on this side of the House and that side of the House, Molly Waldman. Molly was my Chief of Staff. Oh, we had a lot of fun together. And but Molly has now decided to go back to university and has entered law school. So we're so proud of Molly. She's going to be one of those leaders under 40 that people will really recognize and understand what Molly has to give to the province of Saskatchewan. So I'm going to ask each and every one of our members here to please welcome Molly to her Legislative Assembly.
Recognize a member from Regina Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Before I get started with my school group, I also want to join in the introduction of Molly Waldman here today. It's always great to see her. I hope her law school journey is going well so far. I hope her being here doesn't mean that she's quit and is coming back to work for the Sask Party government. Glad to see that shake of head. While I'm on my feet, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to introduce a great group of students. We've got a 5-6 class from our Colas School here seated in the East Gallery today. They're joined by their teacher, Saffron Panko. Great to see you all here today. I hope you enjoy your experience in the legislature. I hope you enjoy question period. Very much looking forward to our opportunity for a little bit of a Q&A after we're finished here in the legislature. I ask all members to join me in welcoming them to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize a member from Last Mountain Touchwood.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you, it is my pleasure to introduce Jody Thomas. He is the business agent from the International Brotherhood of Boilermakers, Local 555, or Triple Nickel, as we commonly refer to them as. Boilermakers are highly skilled tradesmen, Mr. Speaker, and they manufacture build, and maintain all boilers in the world, whether it's the one in your house or the massive 13-story high boilers used in our coal, natural gas, and maybe in the future our nuclear fleet, Mr. Speaker. Boilermakers are in high demand, and we cannot reach our growth goals as a province without their work and all their support in the trades. After question period, Mr. Speaker, we'll be meeting with some of my colleagues, so I ask all members to join me in welcoming a member of Local 555 to their Legislative Assembly.
Recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll join with the member opposite. It's a pleasure in doing so to welcome the leadership of one of the members of Local 555 with the Boilermakers here to his Legislative Assembly. Certainly the Boilermakers and the Saskatchewan building trades are literally the builders of Saskatchewan. They play such a critical role historically in building out the infrastructure, both public and private infrastructure in this province, and they're so critical moving forward as well. I just want to offer him a very warm welcome and to thank you for his leadership to his members and his leadership in building Saskatchewan. Hear, hear, hear.
Recognize the member from Regina University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. To you and through to all members, I would also like to rise and welcome to this, their Legislative Assembly, 13 grade 11 students from Regina Christian who are seated in the East Gallery. It's always a absolutely fantastic day when we have students in the Assembly. Not just to keep us on marginally better behavior during the proceedings of debate, but also for the question and answer afterwards. It truly is a highlight of what we get to do in this Assembly, and I really look forward to getting to meet with you afterwards locally as your MLA and any and all questions that you do have. So, Mr. Speaker, I'd ask all members to join me in welcoming these students to their legislature.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I'd seek leave for an extended introduction.
Leave has been requested. As leave granted, carried.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today is Community-Based Organization Worker Appreciation Day, and we're joined today by a large delegation of community-based organization workers behind me in the West Gallery. We have with us today folks from that represent 86 workplaces and thousands of workers across Saskatchewan. They are the voice for the vulnerable, and they do absolutely invaluable work in all of our communities across this province. I want to first start by welcoming the delegation from CUPE. We have Liliana Knayevich. She's on the executive board of the CBO sector. Cloval Van Opstel. She's the president at Pine Lodge, president of Local 4670. Randy Lang from the Bigger Community Association. We have with us today Tria Donaldson, Eric Bell, Matt Thompson, Angie Pauliu from Mackenzie Ventures in Priestfield, as well as Joanne Lowe from Mackenzie Ventures as well. We also have Glenda Tolver. We have a delegation from SEIU West, Mr. Speaker. We have Gabrielle Woods, Justine Sherpin, Kenny Benor, Myrna Gale, Rod Frank, Darlene Robeson, Justin Gaudette, and Barb Landry. From SGU, these folks are from the Wakamo Social Detox, Help Homes, Mobile Crisis, Open Door Society, and Early Education, as well as some staff members at SGU. And we have with us today Tracy Sawyer, the president, Diane Ralph, the first vice president, Carolyn Rebecca. We also have Ronley Arnold, Jackie Watson, Whitney Kuyansu, Trish Patey, and Ellen Pauley, and I apologize if I've left anyone off that list. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask that the members of this Legislative Assembly welcome these community-based organizations and extend our appreciation for the incredible work that they do, making our communities stronger.
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to join with the member opposite and welcome the folks in the West Gallery this afternoon. My pleasure to proclaim CBO Appreciation Day as today and recognize the important work these individuals do each and every day in our province. Look forward to having a meeting with them later and hear about what they want to talk about, their challenges and some ideas. And with that, I ask all members again to help us all welcome these important people to our Legislative Assembly.
Here, here.
Presenting petitions. I recognize a member from Saskatoon, Meewasin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to present our petition calling on the government to prohibit conversion therapy. The undersigned wish to bring to your attention the following. Conversion therapy, use discredited and abusive practices which attempt to actively change sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. The Saskatchewan Human Rights Code names sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity as one of the prohibited grounds of discrimination. And the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child indicates that children should not be discriminated against based on sexual orientation or gender identity. I'll read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to ban the practice of conversion therapy and prohibit the transportation of youth and adults outside of Saskatchewan for such purposes. The undersigned residents reside in Richmond and Regina. I do so present.
Recognize a member from Moosomin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We, the undersigned residents of the province of Saskatchewan, wish to bring to your attention the following. Whereas the Trudeau Liberal NDP coalition carbon tax is one of the main causes of affordability issues and inflation in the nation of Canada, and that the federal government has signaled that the carbon tax does affect Canadians differently by issuing an exemption on home heating oil for Atlantic Canadian provinces. Further, that the people of Saskatchewan, 85% of whom rely on natural gas to heat their homes, are unfairly left without the support of the Liberal NDP coalition, who continue to drive up the cost of living with their price on carbon. We in the prayer reads as follows. We respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan take the following action. To call upon the Government of Canada to immediately remove the carbon tax from all home heating costs across Canada to reduce inflation and drive down the cost of living faced by all Canadians from coast to coast to coast. Below undersigned are residents of Regina, Elbow, and Saskatoon. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Regina, Douglas Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition calling for the improvement of labour laws in Saskatchewan. Those who signed this petition wish to bring to our attention the following. That even after the October 1st increase, Saskatchewan's minimum wage remains the lowest in Canada at $14 an hour. In addition, the opposition has twice introduced paid sick leave legislation since the onset of the pandemic, calling for a minimum of 10 paid sick days each year and 14 days during a public health crisis. Paid sick leave has been proven to save employers money while making workplaces healthier and safer for all workers. Mr. Speaker, 71% of workers in Canada have experienced workplace violence and/or harassment. And in 2023, the Canadian Bar Association at their AGM adopted a resolution discouraging the use of non-disclosure agreements to silence whistleblowers and victims of abuse, discrimination, and harassment in the workplace. And Mr. Speaker, much more needs to be done to ensure that workplaces in Saskatchewan are harassment-free. I'd like to read the prayer. We in the prayer that reads as follows respectfully request the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to improve conditions for Saskatchewan workers by passing legislation to increase the minimum wage, guarantee paid sick leave, limit non-disclosure agreements, which could silence survivors of workplace harassment, and require employers to track and report incidents of violence and harassment in the workplace. Those signing this petition today come from Kyle, Swift Current, Saskatoon. I do so present.
Reading and receiving petitions, statements by members. Recognize the member from Regina Walsh Acres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This past Saturday, I had the pleasure of attending Jack 94.5's annual Stuff the Bus event. It's a pretty simple concept, Mr. Speaker. You get some generous folks ready to donate their non-perishable food items. You get a city bus. You take those non-perishables and you stuff the bus. All donations went to the Regina and District Food Bank. It's a great cause, Mr. Speaker, and it was great to see the community spirit that went into those donations. But, Mr. Speaker, I really wish we didn't need to do this. Food bank usage in this province went up 24% from March of last year to March of this year. It's up 50% since March of 2019. That's families, kids, people with full-time jobs. A responsible government would look at those numbers and declare an emergency. But that Sask Party government, they tell us everything's fine. They tell us there's nothing wrong with 56,000 visits to food banks in a single month. That's a lot of buses of food. That's a crisis. I call on the government to take real action on this cost of living crisis and make sure people can afford to eat, Mr. Speaker. And I ask all members to join me in thanking the organizers of this year's Stuff the Bus. Thank you.
Recognize the member from Athabasca.
Mr. Speaker, the Saskatchewan Distant Learning Centre, SAS, DLC, and Northlands College have announced a new partnership which will increase accessibility to education for adult learners in the North. Northlands College is providing $100,000 to cover the course's fees for students over the age of 22 living in northern Saskatchewan. One of the biggest obstacles to education in the North is lack of access. Thanks to the combined efforts of DLC and Northlands College, young people will have the opportunity to access online learning from anywhere. Through this new partnership, Mr. Speaker, approximately 200 adults living in the North will have the opportunity to enroll in free grade 10, grade 11, grade 12 courses to have access to more than 70 unique electives for the 23-24 school year. This unprecedented access to education not only empowers students to complete their high school education, but also equips them with the knowledge and skill to pursue post-secondary training and future careers. Our government is dedicated to fostering and investing in educational opportunities and choices for all Saskatchewan students. That is why our government is proud to provide $23 million for the startup and operation of the SAS DLC in this year's budget. Through you, Mr. Speaker, I ask that all members join me in congratulating SAS DLC and Northlands College for their newly announced partnership.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon Town.
Gary Carrier from the Northern Village of Cumberland House was recently honored with an honorary Doctor of Science from the University of Saskatchewan this past June in recognition of his advocacy and dedication to the Saskatchewan River Delta. I had the pleasure of witnessing Gary's passion for the Delta on a recent tour of the area earlier this fall. Gary shares his knowledge of the lands and water not only with those who visit the area, but through his collaborations with the University of Saskatchewan. Gary was born and raised in Cumberland House and grew up in the traditional lifestyle of trapping and fishing. As a traditional knowledge keeper of the Delta region, he has worked with dozens of University of Saskatchewan researchers since the 1980s, sharing his experience and knowledge. He has been a member of the Global Water Futures Advisory Council since 2016 and is a co-investigator on the GWF project entitled "We Need More Than Just Water: Assessing Sediment Limitation in the Saskatchewan River Delta." His decades of work with researchers evaluating the Delta ecosystem, both through his Indigenous knowledge and Western science, has led to valuable contributions which continue to this day. It is with great pleasure that I recognize Gary's accomplishments here today.
Recognize the member from Regina Northeast.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night was a special celebration in our community, Diwali, the Festival of Lights. The Diwali celebration symbolizes victory of light over darkness, good over evil, and knowledge over ignorance. Originally a Hindu festival, it is also celebrated by many of the other religions from India. During this celebration, people light their homes, temples, and workspaces with lamps, candles, and lanterns. Food is also a major focus, with families coming together for feasts and sharing sweets. Many people also send cards to loved ones abroad and take time to remember their loved ones. Members from government were proud to attend the festival and participate with other community members in the celebration. The India-Canada Association of Saskatchewan has made a tremendous contribution to our province, supporting important initiatives in health, business, education, fundraising, and volunteering. It has always been my pleasure for over 35 years now to volunteer and help organize these events with ICA in Regina. I'm proud to see that year after year, more people are becoming involved in beautiful celebrations of Indian Canadian culture. Last night's performances were amazing. In Saskatchewan, we take pride in the individuals and families from across the world who have made Saskatchewan their home. Please join me in recognizing all the volunteers for their hard work year after year. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon, Riversdale.
It's another great day in Riversdale, Mr. Speaker.
Yes.
And not just in Riversdale, in Saskatoon and Saskatchewan. Residents of Saskatoon and surrounding communities will now have access to 18 new addictions treatment spaces at Possibilities Recovery Centre. About a year ago, I had a tour of this facility, meeting the people who volunteer and work there. On Thursday, members from Saskatoon Westview and Saskatoon Southeast joined the Minister for Mental Health and Addictions for this announcement. These new spaces will help adults and youth access intensive outpatient treatment in person in Saskatoon or virtually across the province. Mr. Speaker, our government has added 80 new spaces to Saskatchewan's addictions treatment facilities so far this year, bringing our total to 561 pre-treatment, detox treatment, and post-treatment beds across the province, operated by SHA and third-party facilities. I'm proud to be a part of this government with our commitment of adding 500 new addictions treatment spaces over the next 5 years. This is something I've heard the need for with stakeholders and residents of Riversdale and surrounding communities. It is so important that individuals can get the help that they need. Our government is committed to providing this help with assistance from third-party partners. And Mr. Speaker, I'm so proud to say that every voice in our communities matter, as our former colleague Derek Myers and I have heard and have been strong voices on this issue. I'd like all members to join me in thanking Possibilities and the other organizations for the work they do. Thank you.
Recognize the member from Lloydminster.
Mr. Speaker, the saga continues. It's crystal clear the members opposite support a carbon tax. The only thing that isn't crystal clear to their federal leader is who is the Saskatchewan opposition leader. It seems that Jagmeet saw the Saskatchewan area code, and in typical NDP Liberal coalition fashion, he declined that call. Clearly, Jagmeet has no Saskatchewan numbers in his phone. And just like Justin Trudeau, maybe Jagmeet would be willing to have a conversation if we just elected more Liberals. I think we should put a few comments on the record from those members opposite to remind them just how crystal clear their position is. Their leader, Cam Broughton, in 2016, quote, "We need to put a price on carbon," end quote. Their leader, Ryan Miley, in 2018, quote, "I think carbon pricing is a model that works," end quote. Same leader from his leadership platform, quote, "Support a national approach to carbon pricing," end quote. And what did those members opposite do following those quotes? You got it. They voted him as leader. And again in Hansard on page 869, October 25, 2016, the current leader voted against our motion condemning the federal carbon tax. Some things never change. It seems the same old NDP on that side with their new member continuing with, quote, "My take on the carbon tax, I'm in favour," end quote. Mr. Speaker, there's so much more to show. Their position is crystal clear.
Recognize the member from Kindersley.
Mr. Speaker, today in Saskatchewan, more people went to work than ever before in our province's history. And we know that because on Friday, Statistics Canada reported there are now an all-time record number of 605,300 people working in Saskatchewan, after 19,300 new jobs were created in the past year. That's 53 new jobs created every day 2.2 new jobs every hour, Mr. Speaker. That means in the 25 minutes that the NDP spends running down Saskatchewan every day in question period, 1 new job is created somewhere in the province. Mr. Speaker, there are more women working, there are more men working, there are more young people working, there are more First Nations and Métis people working. There are more jobs in education, more jobs in wholesale and retail trade, more jobs in professional and scientific services, more jobs in business and building support services, more manufacturing jobs, more transportation jobs. That's more jobs in Regina, more jobs in Saskatoon, and more jobs across the province. Mr. Speaker, I know the NDP will keep running down Saskatchewan and saying our economy is a dumpster fire and there's nothing to be proud of, but our government will keep building and protecting the already strongest economy in the nation.
Question period. To recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Is that the members opposite don't want to celebrate the fact that with the latest numbers, this Premier has moved to from dead last on job creation to second last on job creation. Keep clapping. Now, Mr. Speaker, last week we pushed this tired and out-of-touch government to stand up to Danielle Smith and protect the CPP. You'll recall that the Premier couldn't find his feet, and the Finance Minister was, well, she was anything but clear. So will the Finance Minister use her voice today, stand up for Saskatchewan, and say clearly we're all better off with Alberta in the CPP?
Recognize the Minister of Trade and Export Development.
I think the Premier and the Minister of Finance addressed that already, and I know the Deputy Premier will be happy to address it again, Mr. Speaker. But as far as the beginning of that member's question, let's talk about job growth, Mr. Speaker, in this province. An outstanding jobs report that came out Friday, nearly 20,000 jobs created year over year, Mr. Speaker. Not a word from the members opposite about that. Nearly 9,000 jobs added in the last month alone, 20,000 full-time jobs added, Mr. Speaker, over the course of the last year. And what do we see from the NDP? Running down the economy, running down job creators, running down companies. And talk about standing up to leaders, Mr. Speaker. This is a leader of the opposition that literally can't get her call answered by her federal leader, Jagmeet Singh. He literally would not take her call, Mr. Speaker. She said on the floor of the Assembly she called the office. Everybody assumed, well, she talked to Jagmeet Singh. No, she did not. Under questioning from the media, it came out she didn't even reach him.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure that seniors in this province who are worried about their CPP are very impressed by that second worst in the country jobs minister. Right. But Mr. Speaker, when the Finance Minister talks about this issue, that is when she can find her feet, she waves her hands as if it's no big deal. Mr. Speaker, there's nothing further from the truth. Right. Other leaders across Canada, they're using their voices to say how bad this proposal is for Canadians. New Brunswick Premier Blaine Higgs, quote, "If Alberta came out of the CPP funding formula, it would be a major problem for Canadians across the country." Ontario's Finance Minister, and I quote, "In a period of economic uncertainty, no Ontarian or Canadian should have to worry about the security of their retirement savings. Unity is the strength of the CPP, and it is the strength of our country." Why can't our province's Finance Minister be as clear that Alberta should stay in the CPP?
Recognize the Deputy Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I was very clear. Like, we think the CPP is a good plan for all Canadians, quite frankly, except Quebec, which isn't in CPP, by the way. What we were trying to say is that this is a cover for the federal government. They want to make this a huge, urgent issue when it will be a decade or more in the making, and Minister Freeland even admitted to that on the FPT phone call. She said in order they will look at the actual aerials, there's going to be a number of agreements. It probably will end up in court. Alberta hasn't even applied to be withdrawn from CPP. The issue was raised in 2001, quite frankly, in Alberta, It was a referendum was said by their previous premier. This is years in the making. But do you know what's urgent, Mr. Speaker? What's urgent is the fact that there is division being drawn by the federal government in this country over the carbon tax, where some are exempted and we are not, Mr. Speaker. That's urgent. Is it important on CPP? Absolutely. Is it urgent? Is it going to matter anymore in the winter months? Carbon tax will.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Leaders, their counterparts in other provinces can walk and chew gum. This is important. Mr. Speaker, the CPP is one of the only things that seniors can count on to help with the rising cost of living. If Alberta pulls out of the CPP, that's going to mean higher premiums and lower pension payments. Mr. Speaker, those are the facts. Now, before we put this on the minister's radar last week, did she do anything at all to raise these concerns with Alberta's premier, and has she done her homework? Does she know the potential impact to seniors living in Saskatchewan?
Recognize the Deputy Premier.
Speaker, I assure the members opposite I've done my homework. I know that this was first raised in 2001. Did she know that? No. I know that there has been a number of analytical studies done on this. Has she read them? I know that this is the previous premier had called for referendum. Did that alarm her? Not a bit. I know that this is now going to have a number of steps that Alberta is going to undertake before they even consider applying. But you know what? The federal government needs something to change the dial, to change the attention. And you know who took the bait? You know who took the bait? Those members opposite took the bait immediately. They want to change the dial. What is more pressing and urgent to affordability today, Mr. Speaker, is the carbon tax on heating fuel. Where are they at?
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
That is rich coming from members opposite, given that we just went through an emergency session to distract from their own failures, to take the rights away from vulnerable kids. Now, Mr. Speaker, this tired and out-of-touch government wants to talk about build and protect. But let's remember, they're the ones who brought in a tax on building anything in this province, and they can't even be bothered to protect the CPP. Today, Mr. Speaker, we're joined by folks in the gallery who work in community-based organizations across this country, or across this province, rather, Mr. Speaker, and these are people who actually do build and protect. They provide critical supports for mental health, for addictions, working with people with disabilities, and so much more. But, Mr. Speaker, their jobs are made so much more difficult by chronic underfunding by that government. What does the Sask Party have to say to these folks, some of whom have not seen a raise in over a decade?
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, of course we appreciate the great work these individuals do right across our province. Mr. Speaker, the government spends roughly $400 million every year in the CBO sector for wages to support the good work that's being done. Contrary to what was quoted by the member opposite, I'm not aware of no wage increases, Mr. Speaker. We've been able to, in the last 5 years, increase the support we give to CBOs by 16%, Mr. Speaker. Now, it's important to know that many CBO workers, some are unionized, some aren't, but they're not government employees. And each CBO is not exclusively funded by government, Mr. Speaker. We have contracts that we have agreements with each CBO in order to be able to procure services for each hour of work that is done, Mr. Speaker. And so we have that in place, and CBOs, they make that work based on what is given to them each contract.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the folks that have joined us here today, they need more than words from that minister recognizing their important work. They need action. They need serious investments so that they can keep their doors open, so that they can keep providing quality care, and so that they can pay their staff a decent wage. The cost of living crisis is hitting everyone hard across the board. Some of these workers haven't seen pay increases in nearly a decade. Mobile crisis, no pay raise in 7 years, Mr. Speaker. If this minister values their work like he says he does, will he finally provide these community-based organizations with the funding that they need to pay a decent wage?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, we certainly don't make decisions on the floor of the Assembly, but I'm happy to meet with this delegation later today to talk about their situation for sure. But again, as noted, they're not direct employees of the government of Saskatchewan. We do, however, buy services from the CBOs, and we provide funding based on the amount of work done per hour, Mr. Speaker. And so many CBOs, and from based on that, some get money from other areas, Mr. Speaker, and from that they decide how to pay their employees, Mr. Speaker. You know, we have come forward with 16% increase in the last 5 years, Mr. Speaker, and the funding since we've been government has gone up significantly, Mr. Speaker. 61 million has been part of boosting wages in the last several years, Mr. Speaker. So we have value in these members, and we'll talk to them later.
Recognize a member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, but these organizations provide critical care that is squarely within that minister's mandate, and to hear him try to suggest he's not responsible for paying them a decent wage is a bit much. Yeah. Some of these people here today are from Southwest Homes in Swift Current. They work with disabled folks in and around Swift Current. But the staff here today tell me that they have a turnover rate of 67%. Without enough support from the government, staff can't pay their bills and they move on. I've heard chilling stories today of group home staff going to the food bank so that they can properly feed the people with disabilities that they're tasked with caring for. I've seen photos of black mold and derelict states of group homes. I've heard from people who aren't trained to do end-of-life interventions and care that are doing just that, Mr. Speaker. It's very troubling. This government has hundreds of millions to waste on their own pet projects and mismanagement. Why won't they invest in the community-based organization sector that take care of the most vulnerable across this province?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, in terms of CLSD support, Mr. Speaker, $271 million budgeted this year alone, $300 million in child and family. Many of that goes to CBO sector, $400 million in wages in this year's budget. We certainly value the work done by our community-based organizations, and we'll continue to work with them. Mr. Speaker, we have many multi-year contracts, but the funding level is on those contracts is determined at budget time. Unfortunately, every year that I've been here and in this area as well, the NDP have voted against any increases every year I've been here, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
This is an out-of-touch government, and I'm going to suggest that is an out-of-touch minister, Mr. Speaker. Some of the staff here are from Wakamo Social Detox and Pine Lodge Addiction Recovery in my constituency. Everyone in this Assembly knows or ought to know how important their work is in this province today. The Wakamo Detox waitlist is 3 to 5 weeks. Pine Lodge has staff with over 30 years of experience that are still making less than $20 an hour. It is not sustainable, Mr. Speaker. When will the minister provide the supports these community organizations need to pay a living wage?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Again, Mr. Speaker, we value very much the work of our CBO sector in so many areas: child and family, addiction support, CLSD, Mr. Speaker. The increases that we've been able to come up with each and every budget, Mr. Speaker, to buy those services for individuals in the province has increased every single year, Mr. Speaker. Last year, 3%. And again, that is not the only funding available, but it is a large part, I agree, for the CBOs that do that valuable work, Mr. Speaker. we've increased funding, Mr. Speaker, and again, $271 million for disability programs. The Minister of Mental Health and Addictions has come forward with many programs to be able to deliver services, and of course we rely on the CBO sector to continue to do that, Mr. Speaker. Again, we've been trying to increase the wages that we're able to pay, the benefits as well, Mr. Speaker, but every time we attempt to do that, the NDP vote against it.
Here, here. Recognize the member from Regina Alfredson Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the needs are increasing. That is visible to everyone, and this government's decision to chronically underfund this sector is holding this province back. These community-based organization workers work tirelessly on behalf of the very most vulnerable. They are the ones building and protecting this province. The least that this government could do is make sure they earn a decent wage. The failure to prioritize and properly compensate this sector is holding all of us back, Mr. Speaker. It's not fair. When will this tired and out-of-touch government move beyond words, move beyond appreciation days, and support the community-based organization sector in the way that they deserve?
Recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, we have provided more than words, Mr. Speaker. Funding has been up for disability programs since we've been able to form government by 306%, Mr. Speaker. Spending has gone up every year in this area, Mr. Speaker, and in the past 5 years, that funding has increased by 16%, comparable to what other provider unions have received, and so it's comparable, Mr. Speaker. $400 million, again, I repeat, in wages, Mr. Speaker. We understand their concerns. Happy to meet with them later on today, Mr. Speaker. But again, not making promises or negotiating on the floor of the Assembly, Mr. Speaker. No. We're going to continue to work with the sector. We understand the value they bring, Mr. Speaker. We've been there with funding in the last several years, and you know, we're open to conversations about the future. Thank you.
Here. Recognize the member from Regina Coronation Park.
Mr. Speaker, 10 doctors at Regina General Hospital came forward to say that they have experienced racism, discrimination from the hospital leadership. The doctors are all trained in Africa and East Asia. They filed a complaint with the Saskatchewan Human Rights Commission on October 5th. To the minister, when did he become aware of this issue with the leadership at the Regina General Hospital? Here.
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me begin by saying there is absolutely no room for racism in healthcare, or frankly anywhere in Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. We take these concerns very, very seriously. As the member opposite has noted, there has been a complaint filed with the Human Rights Commission. Mr. Speaker, I have had discussions with our senior leadership, both at the SHA and with the Ministry of Health, about this particular concern, Mr. Speaker, and it is also my understanding that the SHA has launched a third-party review or investigation into what has happened in this particular circumstance. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Regina Coronation Park.
Mr. Speaker, imagine foreign healthcare workers looking up work conditions in this province and finding these stories. They can go anywhere. Will they want to come work here? It is that minister's job to deal with these problems immediately. Instead, he let it become stories for the whole world to see. Why did this story have to go to the media before that minister chose to act on it? Here.
Recognize the Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I said in my previous answer, there's absolutely no room for racism here in our healthcare system or anywhere in Saskatchewan. And Mr. Speaker, we very much value and greatly appreciate. We have healthcare workers from across the globe coming to Saskatchewan to work here in our province, Mr. Speaker. Those that have been in our province for decades upon decades, serving patients and residents right across this province, and they are such valuable healthcare workers as part of our healthcare teams. And Mr. Speaker, again, as I have said previously, we do take this matter very, very seriously, which is why the steps that have been already touched upon are being taken with respect to a third-party investigation by the Saskatchewan Health Authority, and as well, Mr. Speaker, the conversations and discussions that I have had with our officials at the Ministry of Health and the senior leadership at the SHA about how important it is to make sure that we are not allowing for any racism in our healthcare system, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Regina-Rosemont.
Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan people are struggling to pay their bills. They're not getting any help from this tired and out-of-touch Sask Party government. And indefensibly, this government has raised taxes and power bills, hiking costs for families. The biggest tax hike, in fact, in Saskatchewan's history, all while withholding needed relief at a time that provincial revenues are strong. It makes no sense. Why is the Sask Party government doing nothing to make life more affordable for people as they face a once-in-a-generation cost of living challenge?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Deputy Premier.
Hear, hear.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said a number of times, there's no doubt there's inflationary pressures, and there's no one answer of how you can alleviate, especially a province can alleviate all of the inflationary pressures, Mr. Speaker. However, I don't agree with the premise of the member's question in that we have done nothing. In fact, that is not true, Mr. Speaker. In this budget, along with other budgets, there's over $2 billion in tax relief and in programs that we have increased or enhanced, Mr. Speaker. There are, in fact, Saskatchewan is one of the lowest jurisdictions in which to live for taxes, housing, and utilities included.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the member from Regina-Rosemont.
Mr. Speaker, what a tired and out-of-touch response. Worse than doing nothing, that Sask Party government has piled on with more taxes and hikes to costs and made matters worse. People in our province are hurting financially. For many, they're in dire financial straits. And of course, that's all been made worse by the choices of this government. We lead the nation in mortgage arrears and in the number of children using the food bank. In a province with all the opportunity and wealth that we have, it shouldn't be this way. Instead of indefensibly hiking costs and taxes as we've seen, why won't this minister and this tired and out-of-touch Sask Party government deliver some lasting relief for Saskatchewan people?
Recognize the Deputy Premier.
I have a two-page list of lasting relief, but let's just touch on the lasting relief of the reduction of our personal income tax, which is indexed to cushion it from inflationary pressures, Mr. Speaker. Under the NDP, when you combine the income tax and PST that he likes to talk about a lot, how much would a single person pay at $40,000 income? Quite frankly, under the NDP, they would pay $937 more in taxes than they do today. How about a family of four at $50,000, Mr. Speaker? Well, that family of four earning $50,000 of total income would pay $2,499 more in taxes than they would have under the NDP. How about a family of four at $75,000, Mr. Speaker? If they're earning $75,000, they would pay $2,273 more under the NDP. I don't like the NDP plan, and now they don't have a plan. They just want to criticize without saying what they would do differently.
Right.
Recognize a member from Regina-Rosemont.
You know, a bunch of cute spin while Saskatchewan people are paying the price and that government drives up the cost of living. They stuck Saskatchewan people with the biggest tax hike in Saskatchewan's history. They more than doubled the take with the PST, far more than $1 billion annually out of the bank accounts and on the backs of Saskatchewan people. They increased 32 fees and taxes in one budget alone. That's their record, Mr. Speaker, in the black and white. It's long past time for this government to offer some relief. Why won't they offer an ounce of relief from the long list of ways they've made life more expensive, and how did they become so out of touch?
Recognize the Deputy Premier.
That member opposite knows that there was a $500 affordability tax credit paid by this government to every resident who paid taxes in the province or filed taxes. They didn't have to pay taxes, they just had to file them, Mr. Speaker, which was a far cry more than what the member opposite suggested that they would do if they were in government. But, Mr. Speaker, again, the lowest personal income tax in the country, Mr. Speaker, that is not just spin. We have the second lowest utility bundle in Canada, Mr. Speaker. That is not just spin. We reduced education property taxes, and there's no longer revolts around the province. That's not just spin. We introduced the Active Families Benefit. That's not just spin. We introduced the Children's Drug Plan. That's not just spin. We have a first-time home buyers tax credit, Mr. Speaker. That's not just spin. We brought daycare for ages 6 and under to $10 a day, Mr. Speaker. And then for students, we have the Saskatchewan Advantage Scholarship that we introduced, not just spin. The Graduate Retention Program, not just spin. We have increased the Seniors Income Plan, which is support for low-income seniors, Mr. Speaker, not just spin. It is in this budget, each and every budget.
Recognize the member from Saskatoon-Meewasin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Education has offered no new supports for queer and trans youth who are at risk of suicide. We know that these vulnerable youth are at increased risk already, and with the government's changes to Bill 137, those kids are at even greater risk. Justice McGaugh warned that the pronoun policy and Bill 137 risks doing irreparable harm to young people. And the government had to use the notwithstanding clause to push it through. And so I asked the Minister of Education again, what specific new supports will he put in place to ensure that more queer and trans youth put at risk by this bill won't be lost to suicide?
You're here.
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've had the opportunity to answer this question a number of times over the last couple of weeks, Mr. Speaker, and I've had the opportunity to highlight the new commitment this year to expand our rapid access counseling services that we already have in 30 communities for people of all ages to 13 communities specifically for children and youth, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at the very heart of it, Bill 137 is an inclusionary policy that ensures that parents have the right to be included in their child's life, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, we have heard, you know the NDP's plan to involving parents, Mr. Speaker? It's this. We've heard it on the radio, we've heard it out in the rotunda, we've heard it in this house for 40 hours. We trust parents, but we trust parents, however. Mr. Speaker, this is a government that believes when it comes to trusting parents, there is no but. There is no however, Mr. Speaker. We believe that parents should have the opportunity to be involved in education. Thank
you. Ministerial statements. Introduction of bills. I recognize,
Mr. Cockrell.
Recognize the Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I move that Bill 143, the Child Care Amendment Act 2023 bilingual, be now introduced and read a first time.
It has been moved by the Minister of Education that Bill number 143 be now introduced and read a first time. It is a pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
First reading of this bill.
When shall the bill be read a second time? I recognize the Minister.
Next sitting of the Assembly.
Next sitting.
Orders
Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Orders of the day.
Government orders, second readings. Item number 1, the Honourable Mr. McMorris moves second reading of Bill number 138, the Workers' Compensation Extending Firefighter Coverage Amendment Act 2023.
Recognize the Minister of Governmental Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to rise today to move second reading of Bill 138, the Workers' Compensation Extending Firefighter Coverage Amendment Act 2023. Throughout the engagement process that took place in 2021-22, a committee of representatives heard from a wide variety of stakeholders about what amendments are needed to ensure the Act meets the needs of both employers and workers. I am pleased today to propose amendments that will address the concerns of injured workers, their families, as well as ensure the ongoing financial stability of employers. First, we are proposing to change the definition of worker to remove executive officers and include students in recognized programs, as well as include the ability to add other categories of workers in the regulations. The proposed amendments to remove executive officers addresses a Recommendation 8 from the Committee of Review. The change will result in the removal of mandatory coverage for executive officers. However, optional coverage would be available. This would provide more flexibility for both the Workers' Compensation Board and executive officers, and coverage could be determined on a case-by-case basis through policies. 8 jurisdictions in Canada do not explicitly include executive officers under the definition of worker. Second, we will amend the privacy provision to mirror the Health Information Protection Act, or HIPAA, to provide for administrative penalties if a privacy breach occurs, and simplify the process for releasing information during reconsideration or review of a decision or compensation claim. We are also looking to require all appeal tribunal decisions to be published. This will provide greater transparency, but also a better understanding of the reason for the decision. Mr. Speaker, we also heard from stakeholders about the need to cover the expenses associated with transporting a deceased worker's body to their usual residence if it's outside of Canada. The legislation currently covers transportation within Canada. We will amend the legislation to provide compensation to a worker's dependent children when the worker passes away from a non-work related injury while on compensation, no matter the length of time on compensation. These amendments will also simplify the medical review panel process. The amendments will allow for an increase to the permanent functional impairment award over a 4-year period and indexed afterwards. Additionally, the independence allowance will be indexed. Finally, we are also expanding the presumptive occupational disease coverage for firefighters to include 6 additional types of primary site cancer: penile, pancreatic, thyroid, soft tissue sarcoma, mesothelioma, and laryngeal cancer. Mr. Speaker, this amendment would mean that Saskatchewan is leading all other Canadian jurisdictions in presumptive coverage for firefighters. Overall, the amendments to the Act will make administrative processes easier for injured workers, loved ones grieving the loss of a deceased worker, and provide more comprehensive cancer coverage for firefighters who put their lives at risk to protect the citizens of this province. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, I move second reading of this bill.
It has been moved that Bill number 138 be now read a second time. Assembly ready for the question. I recognize the member from Regina University.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It is genuinely a real pleasure to be on my feet to be able to speak to this piece of legislation before the Assembly Bill number 138. I want to start off by recognizing the good work done by this amendment, by this piece of legislation, as well as I think the incredibly steadfast and professional advocacy and lobbying work done by the firefighters and by volunteer firefighters and EMTs across this province as they've made the case to members on both sides for the importance of these changes. I think all members in this Assembly really appreciate the critical work that these folks do on the front line, as well as the good work that they do in really educating all of us about what the job looks like. I had the opportunity last summer, Mr. Speaker, to participate in the I'm trying to remember what it's called, but essentially the bring a politician to work day that the folks with Fire do here in Regina, allowing you to experience some of the typical occurrences in a day of work from them. I know the member from Regina Rosemont is a regular at that event, and the member for Regina Douglas Park and myself had the opportunity to participate as well, and it really drives home the physicality of the job, as well as the quick decision-making and just critical work that they do in this community above and beyond simply fighting fires. I'd note in the minister's comments, he really talked about a thorough and seemingly well-developed engagement and consultation process, which I think is good to hear about, and should be that type of consultation engagement should be taking place with every piece of legislation that comes before this Assembly, really to ensure that it meets the needs of impacted parties. Also talked about the transparency piece, as appeals are going to be publicly available. Mr. Speaker, any transparency is likely to increase public engagement as well as trust in the process, and I think is likely a good change to see here. As the Minister said, this will expand the list of new cancers. I believe there were 6 to the list of occupational diseases for firefighters, making this the broadest in Canada, which is something to applaud and to agree upon. And, you know, Mr. Speaker, I think if this bill was only those things, there would have been more support in happily voting it through in one day. But as the minister's comments allude to, there are some questions surrounding the removal of mandatory coverage for executive officers, you know, noting what he said about the availability either electively or on a case-by-case basis, and noting that some jurisdictions do have this, but at this point, it's not clear why this change was made, and I think it's important to do some of that work that I spoke of earlier in consulting with stakeholders, because we'd hate to see that this change makes us less competitive for filling those executive offices. Beyond that, Mr. Speaker, I think it's good to see the increase to the permanent impairment compensation and the tying, of course, of the independent allowance to CPI. Beyond that, Mr. Speaker, I know the critic will do that important engagement work that I spoke of earlier with impacted stakeholders, and with that, I am happy to move to adjourn debate on Bill number 138, the Workers' Compensation Extending Firefighter Coverage Amendment Act 2023.
Here. Members move to adjourn debate. It's a pleasure, Assembly, to adopt the motion. Somebody agree, please? Agree. Carried.
Government order, second readings, item number 2. The Honourable Ms. Ayr to move second reading of Bill number 140, the Miscellaneous Statutes Repeal Act 2023.
Recognize the Justice Minister and Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to move second reading of the Miscellaneous Statutes Repeal Act 2023. As you know, the government has an ongoing commitment to repeal legislation that has become outdated or obsolete. This includes older acts that are no longer relevant, acts that have been replaced by new legislation, and private acts where nonprofit organizations have ceased operation. This year, there are 8 acts which are proposed for repeal. The Names of Homes Act, the Saskatchewan Advantage Grant for Education Savings, or SAGES Act, an act respecting the Canadian Bible Society, Saskatchewan District, an act respecting the summer resort village of Carlisle Lake Resort, an act to incorporate Sacred Heart Academy, an act to incorporate the Catholic Women's League, an act to incorporate the Herbert Bible School Association, and an act to incorporate the Wildlife Federation, or Foundation rather, of Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, in preparing the bill, Justice officials have worked with officials from other ministries and with stakeholders to confirm that the proposed repeal of legislation is appropriate, and I am pleased to move second reading of the Miscellaneous Statutes Repeal Act 2023.
It has been moved that Bill number 140 be now read a second time. Is the Assembly ready for the question? I recognize a member from Saskatoon-Meewasin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor to be on my feet today, joining into adjourned debate and responding to the Minister on this Bill number 140, the Miscellaneous Statutes Repeal Act. Mr. Speaker, we commend the government on the work they are doing, going through the books and looking at bills from the past that are no longer relevant. This is important housekeeping, Mr. Speaker, and it's interesting to see some of these bills and acts that were brought in before many of us were even elected or born, Mr. Speaker. But you know, as we look to the past, look at these issues that were important at a time but may not resonate today. I think it's important to think about some of the issues that are important and still do resonate today. Mr. Speaker, we have on this list, you know, faith-based education, we have wildlife, home ownership. On home ownership, you know, we currently look at some of the worst mortgage arrears in the country. Certainly something that we should be looking at within this chamber, certainly something that we would have brought up had we had an emergency debate on cost of living issues. But important things to look at. You know, Mr. Speaker, what I don't see on this list, which I think is a real oversight, is that there is no repeal to Bill 137 that we just passed in an emergency session that will cause irreparable harm to youth and young people. And I do really encourage the officials in the Ministry of Justice as they're looking at legislation on the books that is no longer needed or obsolete or indeed flies in the face of human rights, the Charter of Human Rights or the Saskatchewan Human Rights Code, that will cause irreparable harm to queer and trans youth in our province, that they look to repeal that legislation. I know, Mr. Speaker, that my colleagues will all weigh in on this Statutes Repeal Act and looking at these pieces of legislation. I know our critic will engage with some stakeholders to see if we're losing any golden nuggets here. But with that, Mr. Speaker, I move to adjourn debate on Bill number 140, the Miscellaneous Statutes Repeal Act 2023.
Member has moved to adjourn debate. It is a pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion. Carried.
Government orders, second readings. Item number 3. Resume. The Honourable Ms. Eyre to move second reading of Bill number 141, the Statute Law Amendment Act 2023.
Recognize the Minister of Justice and Attorney General.
I rise today to move second reading of the Statute Law Amendment Act 2023. This bill will make housekeeping changes to a number of acts: the Animal Production Act, the Architects Act 1996, the Business Corporations Act 2021, the Saskatchewan Technology Startup Incentive Act will have cross-references and language errors corrected. Provisions relating to the new application for leave to appeal process will be added to the Insurance Act and the Securities Act 1998. References to repealed acts will be replaced with the current applicable legislation in the Enforcement of Money Judgments Act, the Public Guardian and Trustee Act, the Public Health Act 1994, and the Summary Offences Procedure Act 1990. Redundant or out-of-date provisions will be repealed, Mr. Speaker, in the Personal Property Security Act, the Public Pension and Benefits Administration Corporation Act, and the Time Act. The name of a government branch will be updated in the Medical Laboratory Licensing Act 1994, and finally references to Her Majesty will be amended in the Justice and Attorney General Act, the Provincial Sales Tax Act, and the Sale or Lease of Certain Lands Act. Mr. Speaker, these changes will not have a substantive impact on the acts being amended, and the bill fits within the policy of government to update and modernize legislation. Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to move second reading of the Statute Law Amendment Act 2023.
It Has been moved that Bill number 141 be now read a second time. Assembly ready for the question. I recognize the member from Saskatoon-Meewasin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor again to be on my feet in response to the Minister and joining in on adjourned debate on Bill number 141, the Statute Law Amendment Act 2023. Mr. Speaker, again, we're seeing some housekeeping put forward by the government. Always good to see. What we're seeing here is a fixing of grammar, cross-reference mistakes, spelling, very important work that needs to be done to ensure that our legislation is sound and follows the nature of the times. We also see replacing references of Her Majesty the Queen to the Crown and changing any mention of his or her to their to be gender neutral. Mr. Speaker, while we speak about Her Majesty the Queen, every day we sit in this chamber or stand in this chamber and look at her portrait, and the Crown plays a very important role in our government system as a parliamentary democracy, and so it's important that we do this work as we have a line of succession, but you don't always just want to go back and have to update these pieces of legislation every time we see a monarch change in Canada or a sovereign change. Mr. Speaker, I think what's really interesting here is just the importance placed on pronouns. And in the case, we're talking about them again. This time it's not a searing indictment of the government's priorities, just housekeeping. But as you can see how important the use of pronouns can be in legislation, as they are important to people in this province as well. I want to just take a moment, Mr. Speaker, just to say a sincere thank you to all the public servants who work to update, to draft bills, really important work that is done in our province and in our democracy. So just a huge shout out to that. And I know that my colleagues will have more to say, more engagement with stakeholders. There was a number of acts there that we're going into. And so at this time, I will move to adjourn debate on Bill number 141, the Statute Law Amendment Act 2023.
The member has moved to adjourn debate. It's a pleasure, Assembly, to adopt the motion. Carried.
Government orders second readings. Item number 4, the Honourable Mr. Duncan to move second reading of Bill number 142, the Miscellaneous Statutes Utility Line Locates Amendment Act 2023.
Recognize the Minister of Crown Investments Corporation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise in the House today to move the second reading of Bill number 142, the Miscellaneous Statutes Utility Line Locates Amendment Act 2023. As members know, utility line locating is a critical safety measure to ensure that utility providers have marked their lines in advance to any ground disturbance work. I'm proud to say that this bill brings an important consistency across the piece of Crown utility legislation in the province. The implementation of this bill will result in consequential amendments to the legislation for Sask Power, SaskTel, as well as Sask Energy, bringing a standardization to line locate timing to just 3 working days. This bill was created to ensure both safety and predictability. It also aligns the Crowns with current excavation industry practices and formalizes the industry practice for line locate timing that is already occurring in the province. This would also align Saskatchewan with the line locate provisions currently utilized by Alberta's one-call service and by the Canada Energy Regulator. As expected, in the spirit of cooperation, all 3 Crown utilities agree with the amendments in their respective legislation. Mr. Speaker, this is a win-win situation for both the excavating industry and our Crown utilities. By harmonizing line locate times to 3 working days, this bill provides clarity, enhances safety, and codifies the existing line locate practices utilized by the utilities. With that, Mr. Speaker, I will move second reading of Bill number 142, the Miscellaneous Statutes Utility Line Locates Amendment Act 2023. Thank you.
Hear, hear.
It has been moved that Bill number 142 be now read a second time. Assembly ready for the question. I recognize the member from Saskatoon-Meewasin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's an honor again to be on my feet speaking to Bill number 142, the Miscellaneous Statutes Utility Line Locates Amendment Act 2023. Mr. Speaker, as we just heard from the Minister, this is an important piece of legislation that it brings a uniform approach to anyone who are digging around utility lines, that they have to provide a 3-day notice to SaskTel, Sask Power, and Sask Energy as applicable. What we used to see is a 48-hour approach. We really do believe that a 3-day approach, bringing those 3 Crown corporations together, is an important safety measure that will really help our Crown corporations, and those who are doing excavation and any renovations and digging will really bring those 4 organizations together. Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to hear from the Minister that we have buy-in from the 3 Crown corporations, that they're united under this change. And as I've mentioned, this is an important change for safety. Mr. Speaker, while I'm on my feet discussing our Crown corporations, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of the folks who work in our Crown corporations. You know, today we're talking about SaskTel, Sask Power, and Sask Energy. Absolutely important Crown corporations, each one of them ensuring that folks in Saskatchewan have access to some of the most affordable rates in the country. These are mechanisms that we as Saskatchewan people can use to make life more affordable. And I hope that the government will continue to look at ways at reducing the costs on folks in our province using the really valuable gems that are our Crown corporations. Mr. Speaker, I know that my colleagues will, again, as I've mentioned, have a lot more to say on this. We will be engaging with stakeholders. We think that, at first glance of this is an important amendment. And so at this time, I'm going to move to adjourn debate on Bill number 142, the Miscellaneous Statutes Utility Line Locates Amendment Act 2023.
Member has moved to adjourn debate. It is a pleasure assembly to adopt the motion. Carried. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that this House do now adjourn.
The Government House Leader moved to adjourn the House. It is a pleasure assembly to adopt the motion. Carried. This House now stands adjourned till 1:30 tomorrow. Always going out there.